Good morning. I'm Rebecca Wightman, your service leader, joined by pianist Madeline Harts and AV specialist Jeremy Joinchik. Welcome to all members, friends, and visitors to the Unitarian Universalist Church of East Aurora. We are a community in which all people are welcomed, regardless of beliefs, ethnicities, race, gender, sexual orientation, or economic standing. Welcome to a safe place. And with Erie County currently considered medium risk by the CDC for contracting COVID, we will have coffee hour today. Now, please take a moment to greet the person next to you. Hi. They're right. Everyone's right there. And before we begin, are there any announcements? Okay, one for Rich.
So this is a lousy announcement on the day of happiness, but there was a vandal who decided to tear down our Black Lives Matter sign off the wall of the church, and they actually cut with a knife the banner and took the banner with them, so they may hang it on their house or something, I don't know. But in any case, it's down. We're going to put it back up. We're not going to let an angry person take something away from us, and it's going to be like the Who's down in Whoville when the presents were all stolen by the Grinch. They're going to still sing happily the song, because what we're doing is has more meaning than a sign. So.
Any other announcements? I begin this service by acknowledging that our nation was largely built on the ancestral land of Native nations and the labor of enslaved peoples. May we persevere to achieve a clear understanding of our shared past and utilize these lessons learned for good and for progress. Now Madeline Harts will play the prelude, Elton's Song by John Elton. I light the chalice lighting words are printed on your order of service. There we go. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. And now we turn to Rich Moglia-Cannon to provide the opening words.
The opening words this morning are from former Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. Discovering more joy does not, I'm sorry to say, save us from the inevitability of hardship and heartbreak. In fact, we may cry more easily, but we will laugh more easily too. Perhaps we are just more alive. Yet, as we discover more joy, we can face suffering in a way that ennobles rather than embitters. We have hardship without becoming hard. We have heartbreak without being broken.
We are reminded that UUEA cannot do anything without members and friends showing up and supporting each other. Sincere thanks to those who participate in events, volunteer their time, share their talents, or are in a position to be generous. If you are inclined to give after this service, there is a plate on the bookshelf in the back, or you may donate at uuea.org. Madeline will now play Spirit of Life. So for today's program, it is going to be led by Rich Moglia-Cannon. Rich is the current board chair for the UU Church of East Aurora. He has played this role since May of 2020. He also leads the Future Committee, the church group that developed the roadmap to building a more vibrant and growing congregation. He is happily married to his soulmate, Mary, and they live in East Aurora with Princess Eva, their dog. Here's Rich on Unitarian Universalism and the pursuit of happiness.
So one thing I cut out of my program because it was running a little long was talking about the Dalai Lama and why having a happiness spiritual practice was so important. He talked about in the Book of Joy that you can't stop the world's terrible things from happening, but what you can do is develop an immunity, so to speak. He calls it a mental immunity or an emotional immunity, so that when these things do occur, they impact you. You still feel them, you probably feel them more deeply, but your recovery is shorter and you bounce back to happiness more quickly. So with that, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of hints about how to be more happy. So a very great subject today. So the Declaration of Independence stated that all people are endowed with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it sounds like a good time to be getting brushed up on happiness. Depression's up, anxiety's up, motor vehicle accidents are up, drunk driving's up. So it's a tough time. But I contend that even before the pandemic, we were living like kings. So, for example, when a king wants a feast, he calls all of the farmers, and they ship all the good food to the feast, and his master chefs prepare the meal. I can do that. I can run down to Rick's and have an amazing meal. I can have king crab. I don't know if they have king crab there, but I can have king crab shipped all the way from Alaska. I can have fish or seafoods caught in any part of the world, freshly prepared by a great chef and served to me. I can have a fresh strawberry any day of the year. Try that, King George. So we not only have advantages in food. Well, lastly, of course, I can go into Wegmans and there's a football field of food to choose from. If the king wanted to get entertained, he would call for his minister, what's the funny guy? I can't remember. His court jester to come in, and he'd call for his musicians, and the best musicians in the kingdom would come down and entertain him. I can do better than that. I saw Yo-Yo Ma in person. I've seen Billy Joel. I've seen Bruce Springsteen. And if I don't even have to limit it to people who are alive. I saw the Beatles in concert. I saw Elvis Presley perform on the Ed Sullivan Show. So I think I've got him beat on that front too. If the king wanted to share his portrait with a friend in Paris, he'd call for his best artist, and he'd paint him a portrait. And a few weeks later, he'd hand the portrait to a courier, and maybe in a couple of months, the courier would make his way to Paris, and the friend would have the picture. I have an iPhone 13. I can take a selfie, and I can text it to my best friend anywhere in the world within seconds. And for traveling, King George certainly could have come to the United States, but he didn't, because it was hard traveling that far, and it was dangerous. You can easily die on a cross ocean trip. I had the privilege to sit in the pews of the church that George Washington used to go to, which was about 10 miles from Mount Vernon, and it took him 5 hours each direction because the roads were so bumpy and his wife had to ride in the carriage. He had to walk the horse the 10 miles to the church and the 10 miles back. 10 hours. That's a committed Christian, all right. However, I can go 10 miles, and some of you went 10 miles in 15 minutes this morning. For God's sake, I can fly through the clouds on a chair. And I have. A funny story about living like kings and not appreciating it is I was sitting in a plane that for the first time ever had email service, that you can log on to your email account and you can receive and send emails. And as we were taking off, I was picturing the meeting I was just in, and I was picturing that message that I hit the send button and it bounced up to the satellite and bounced back to Sacramento. And then within seconds, the lady sent me an email back, and I pictured her email hitting the satellite and chasing the plane and boom, going into my box. And then all of a sudden, the email system went down. And the person sitting next to me said, "Oh, you believe this?" So we live like kings, but we're still not happy most of the time. So why is it so hard to be happy? Well, neuroscientist Dean, very good, he caught up with me. Dean Burnett, who wrote the book, The Happy Brain, has been studying the brain and its ability to process and make you feel happy. And he said one of the problems is that happiness is not the default setting for our brain. Our brains evolved very rapidly in scientific terms over several thousands and thousands of years. And the brain, the natural selection process, wasn't valuing happiness in that selection process. It was prioritizing analytical ability. It was processing people who were smart enough to be fearful and good enough to run away when things got a little scary. So those were the parts of the brain, fear, anxiety, analytics, that the selection process, the natural selection process, favored. And so those parts of your brain are very well developed, while the part of your brain on happiness is not nearly as developed. Secondly, Dr. Burnett says that our culture disappoints us on a regular basis because there's this myth about happily ever after. This notion that if I can just get that college degree, or if I can just land that job, or if I can just find that perfect partner, everything would be great and I'd be happily ever after. But as we've all found in life, or most of us have found in life, that the marriage is just, and the honeymoon is just that. It's the marriage and the honeymoon, and then the work begins. The world spills over into your relationships. Natural conflicts develop. Conflict is inevitable, and the people who work at the relationships are the ones who have long and happy marriages, and the ones who don't, well, the divorce rate's 50% in this country. What can I say? Oops, go back a step. All right. So how much of this happiness thing can we really control, right? I mean, you know those people, those Pollyanna, the people who see everything through those glasses that make everything look great. Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, actually did a study on that and found that insurance agents who were successful, and they're rare because it's a brutal thing. You've got to call people. You got to get like 99 no's before you get your yes. And you've got to take all that rejection again and again and again. And he found that people who were genetically disposed to be good insurance salesmen, they had their brains wired in a slightly different way. Whenever they were rejected, it was always somebody else's fault, right? The person was bothered by their baby crying in the background. The person didn't have enough money. The person was having a bad day. It was always something else that had nothing to do with me. But when I got the sale, it was a perfect pitch. I said just the right thing at the right time. I was patient with my client. I was persistent, just in the right doses. It was all about me. And that's how good salesmen persist. And the turnover rate, the quit rate is about 95% on insurance agents. And so being hardwired for that, for seeing the world in a slightly different manner is a good thing. So different experts will argue exactly what the percentages are here, but suffices to say genetics does play a role. I'm sorry, go back. I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit more. The thing that surprised me was the life circumstances. So if you're born in a happy family, or if you're born in to wealth, or if you happen to have struck it rich with the lottery, all those life circumstances actually don't affect your life much. They've actually done research that finds that the day before the happiness level you had before you won the lottery, a year later, is actually about the same. And that same thing is true for somebody who loses a limb. We go back to our old happiness level. Why? Because the things that dominate our ability to feel happiness are genetics and how we live day to day. And that part day to day that experts agree on, it's significant and it's actionable. You could affect your happiness. They have a free class at California, Berkeley, I believe, that you can take online that they've documented increases happiness by 5% at the end of the 8 weeks. And that persists for several months after that, at least. They haven't measured it longer than that. Now you can change the slide. So, where are you viewers? We have to get from the heart to the head at some point really quick here. So I'm going to go to our heads. And I'm going to say, okay, what does the research say boosts happiness? Okay? What does the research say boosts happiness? Well, there's actually many things that you can do on a regular basis that's been proven by research. But the three biggies, okay? The three biggest ones are, number one, reframing the situation. What does that mean? Well, that means when you look at a situation and you can decide, I can be very sad and upset by this, or I can look at it from a little bit different perspective and I can see some of the benefits of what just happened. Let me give you an example. Just the other day, on one of those warm spring days, our air conditioner went out. And we called the service guy, and the service guy came in. Let's call him John. So I was talking to John, and I asked him how it was going. He goes, oh, it's really busy. And I'm like, oh, that's surprising this early in the year. And he said, well, he goes, the reason it's really busy for me is because my boss had a severe case of COVID and was in the hospital for months. Nearly died. He's out now, but he's disabled, and he can't run the business. So I've taken over those responsibilities as well as doing my regular job. And so I said, wow, that sounds tough. Are you okay? And he said, well, it is a little tough, but I'm doing great. And I said, great. He goes, yeah. He goes, well, the way I figure, if I hadn't taken this on, all of my buddies, all my colleagues would have lost their paychecks. And secondly, I kind of believe that life is full of challenges, and it's my duty as a human being to take on those challenges when they come. And I was sitting there going, wow, talk about reframing a situation. Anybody would have had a perfect, legitimate reason to just quit, go find another job. This man not only took on this additional responsibility, but he's looking at it as a positive, and it's making him feel more like connected to his meaning of life. All right. Second, gratitude. Gratitude. It's like appreciating the fact that I can fly through the air in a chair, through the clouds. I can do that. I had a herniated disc when I was 32 years old. And for that summer, I couldn't stand up I couldn't stand up straight. I was hunched over about 90 degrees, and I could only walk from like here to the back of the room before I'd have to sit down because the pain was so severe. And I finally got surgery to do it, and I called on the phone. I said, who's this doctor who's going to perform the surgery? And he says, well, it's Dr. Weber. And I said, oh, I'm going to look up Dr. Weber. And it turns out he was a renowned brain surgeon. So in this case, it did take a brain surgeon to do it. So, but it turns out that the procedure had become routine to the extent that this was just how he was putting food on the table. His really interesting work on brain surgery was on other things, but he just had to cut me open in the back and clean up a few things, as he called it. But I grew to appreciate two things during my fight there. The first was that my uncle had severe arthritis his whole life, starting when he was a young man in his 20s. And he dealt with that for decades. And I was just uncomfortable with my Oxycontin. Yeah. I was just a little uncomfortable and backed up, if you know what I mean, from the Oxycontin. But I was not that bad off, and I still had this option in my back pocket of getting surgery. So I wasn't sweating it, where he had surgeries after surgeries, and it just put off the pain a little bit. So now a more dramatic example, 2 soldiers walking down, in a war zone, and they accidentally sent off a landmine, and they're rushed to the hospital, blows up, they're rushed to the hospital, the doctors save their lives, but they both lose both of their legs. So a week later, an observer in the hospital ward noticed that one of the soldiers was laying in a fetal position, crying and lamenting whether life was worth it, whether there was any goodness in his life left. The other soldier was wheeling around in glee on his wheelchair in the hospital ward. And when he was asked, well, why are you so happy? He said, I could have died. This is a second lease on life for me. And anyway, with my wheelchair, I'm closer to the flowers now. So talk about gratitude. He had a big dose of it. The second thing about my little surgery thing is that 50 or 100 years ago, that surgery wasn't possible, the one that got me back to being a human being, an erectus, a man who could stand up straight. And so if I had lived 100 years ago, I would have lived with that disability my whole life. I'd have been in a wheelchair. So grateful for that as well. So this one boggles my mind. This one just boggles my mind. So when I'm feeling bad, I'm sitting there going, why isn't anybody calling me? Why isn't anybody doing anything for me? Why don't they know that I'm feeling lousy, right? Why isn't the world like trying to make me feel better? Well, it turns out that a call from a friend would be nice if I had stayed in contact with my friends enough so that they knew that something bad had happened to me. But the really interesting thing here is that your happiness will be impacted more by you being making somebody else happy than you by somebody else making you happy. So I can't go on any further without talking about the King of Joy, or the Kings of Joy, the Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and the former Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They collaborated on a book called The Book of Joy, which I highly recommend. But it's a master class, okay? So, if you're struggling with like day-to-day, like little things and fighting the demons every day, this may be a stretch, okay? 8 pillars. I thought about going through all this and I was like, wait a second, I'm aiming a little too high. Let's aim for happiness. Joy comes next, all right? But you'll see how the 3 items that I just went on are 3 most impactful based on scientific knowledge are also on the 8 pillars of joy list. So I left the best to last, people, okay? The best. All right. So could you imagine a research study going 80 years, okay? So in the late 1930s, somebody said, hey, let's follow human beings through their life and see how their life choices affect the rest of their life, their health and so forth. So they selected a bunch of Harvard sophomores, including President Kennedy, by the way, who wasn't president, obviously, at that point. And they also selected some inner-city youth because they didn't want to just have affluent people. They wanted to have people who lived in poverty as well. Now, at Harvard in the 1930s, only men attended. So later they expanded it to include women too. So this applies to both men and women. And they gathered data every other year from this group. And through surveys, interviews, medical records, brain scans, etc. So all that studying, all that time, all those people, and by the way, there's only about 15 people left in the study because they're in their upper 90s now. So it's very long A lot of interesting data came out of it. But one factor stood above all the rest, and it was almost a fountain of youth, because not only was this factor the best predictor for happiness and the level of happiness, but it was also something that helped push off mental and physical decline and increase longevity. It had the same impact on the affluent people in the study and the less affluent people in the study. And it was more predictive than fame, fortune, IQ, genetics for happiness. Does anybody know what this factor is? Come on. Give me your best guess. Dave.
Having a deep group of network of friends and family and that kind of thing.
Okay, and over here I heard gratitude. Any other guesses? Drum roll, go ahead. Reveal. Dave's got it. He's got the secret of life. It's the quality of your relationships. This is such a big deal that they actually found, which was extraordinary for the doctors in the house, was that at the age of 50, when you surveyed a person and you asked, how satisfied are you with your relationships, the score on that measure was more predictive of health 2 decades later than your cholesterol level. So apparently this is a big deal. Now I'm looking at your faces and I'm sitting there going, some of you are like doing a mental inventory right now. How many close relationships do I have? How long am I going to live? Other of you are going, damn, I wish I'd have known this a couple decades ago. That's the way I felt when I saw this. I was like, oh, man, because I was chasing that fame and fortune thing, right? I was chasing that fame and fortune thing. And today, when you survey millennials, 80% have the biggest goal being money, and another 50% rate fame is really, really important to them. And they haven't discovered the secret yet. So yes, to a strong marriage. A bad marriage actually goes the other direction, takes away some of that good stuff, happiness and such. So it's not just a marriage, it's a good marriage. But it's also relationships with friends, relationships with family members. So is it too late? Is it too late? Well, the good news is that what they found with the people who were most impactful on the point of friends was that they didn't have a stagnant group of friends and family and loved ones. Those changed. So as time went on, as somebody moved to another part of the country, they replaced that friend. Maybe one of the family members passed, and then maybe they got close to another family member, maybe a nephew or a niece. So there's an infinite number of people around us who we can have relationships with, right? Almost infinite, not infinite, literally, but more than you can handle, let me put it that way. So time to lean in a little bit if you feel that this isn't where you want it to be right now. So I was reflecting on our time. You know, this presentation is not just about happiness, it's about Unitarian Universalism and the pursuit of happiness. So I wanted to tie those two things together quickly here before I finish up. The first thing is that I remember sitting there as admittedly not being a people person and being a recovered pessimist. I did a survey for the Future Committee back in 2017 at this church, and we asked everybody, what's the number one reason you come to church? And the number one reason people at this church came to church was for the people. So kind of like intuitively as a group, we knew the answer to the Harvard study. We were like, Dave, yeah, it's the quality of your network. It's the quality of your friends. I just brushed it off. I was like, oh, well, we're going to go past that friend thing and we're going to develop a great church. But it turns out that a great church is partly the friend thing. So I saw this really interesting quote on the First Unitarian Church, which is the church in Rochester that Mary and I first started going to, first became UUers. And let me read it to you here. We believe that the big spiritual questions and work worth doing in this world are better to take on together than alone. We are grounded in the idea and practice of covenant, the promises that we make to each other, not because we always get along or get it right, but because we see ourselves in relationship with others, always growing and learning, and always worthy. So there are two really important concepts about Unitarian Universalism that I wanted to bring, tease out of that paragraph. The first was this talk about work worth doing. What is it that they could be talking about? Well, I read this really interesting article by Greg Mutter, I believe his name was, and he wrote a catchy little title, said, "I don't believe in the 7 principles." And I was like, well, I got to read this. So I read it, and it turns out that what he bristles at is this notion that those are our beliefs. He says those can only be beliefs if they're true, but several of the 7 principles are not true. Justice for all people, that's not true in the world today. You may want it to be, and that's the point, is that Mr. Mutter's point, I think it's Reverend Mutter, his point is that the 7 principles are aspirations. They are the way we want the world to be, and being part of the UU Church is a call to action, saying, hey, if you join us, this is what we're working on. We're working on making this a reality in the world. So if you're up for that, come on board, because we got some work to do together. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. The second thing is that word that was thrown in there in the middle, covenant. Now, you'll notice that we don't talk a lot about covenants here, and I'm not sure that would be good or not to do that. But the UU Church is a church that thrives on covenant. And what does that mean? It's part of its foundation. It's part of its theology. Most of the time, you're in a church and you're kind of making a covenant with the Lord or whoever you believe is the spiritual, person at the controls, right? You've got a covenant. I'm going to believe. I'm going to give my life for you. I'm going to do all these rituals that you want me to do, and so forth. But we don't have that because we all have different beliefs. But what we've done instead is to say, what's really important? The really important thing is that we make promises to one another. Okay? When you come on board, I make a promise to you that I'm going to respect your beliefs, right? They may not be the same beliefs as I have, but I'm going to respect those. I'm going to accept you as you are. I'm not going to try to change your beliefs. Well, sometimes I'll try, but so that's the first thing. And then the second thing, we have this search for truth and meaning. Well, it's kind of a hard journey to find truth and meaning all by yourself. So part of the covenant is I'm going to help you, or I'm going to encourage you to climb that journey, because it's probably uphill. Okay? So I'm going to help you on that. And then the last thing is when you fall down, or when you're not being your best self, I'm going to try to help you to turn that around. Okay? So that's the covenant. That's an unwritten covenant in our church. Some churches actually write that down, right? They write that down. When we did our new member ceremony, I don't know if you noticed, but we were kind of making a covenant with each other, right? Remember that? You guys were talking, you were up here and you were saying, hey, this is what I promise. I'm going to come and I'm going to give you my ideas and I'm going to participate. And we come back and we said, hey, we got your back. We're there for you guys. Thanks for coming on board. We got some work to do. Let's go. So those two ideas you can see are really lined up with this happiness thing, because it's about the relationships and it's about important, meaningful work. And volunteering, this notion of the 7 principles, putting those in actions is kindness and generosity, right? It's the generosity of your spirit. It's the generosity of your time. It's the generosity of your talent. It's not just the generosity of your money, but that comes in handy too sometimes. So I just put the final slide here. I just put some of the happiness practices that come out in the literature and that some of the ones we talked about today, and showed how they kind of line up with some of the things that we do. And the last one I wanted to make sure you knew is that we as UUers, especially in East Aurora, are really good at humility. In fact, I think we're the best. So live long and prosper and be happy.
Very thoughtful and uplifting presentation. Please join me for extinguishing of the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And we turn to Rich again for our closing words.
Our closing words today are from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and they're quoted from the Book of Joy. One great question underlies our existence. What is the purpose of life? After much consideration, and this is the Dalai Lama speaking, after much consideration, I believe that the purpose of life is to find happiness. The ultimate source of happiness is within us. Not money, not power, not status. Some of my friends are billionaires, but they are very unhappy people. Power and money fail to bring inner peace. Outward attainment will not bring real inner joyfulness. We must look inside. Sadly, many of the things that undermine our joy and happiness we create ourselves. Often it comes from the negative tendencies of the mind, emotional reactivity, or from our inability to appreciate and utilize the resources that exist within us. The suffering from a natural disaster we cannot control, but the suffering from our daily disasters we can. We create most of our suffering. I'll say that again. We create most of our suffering, so it should be logical that we also have the ability to create more joy. It simply depends on the attitudes, the perspectives, and the reactions we bring to the situations and to our relationships with other people. When it comes to personal happiness, there is a lot that we as individuals can do. There is a lot that we as individuals can do. So there are only 2 days that nothing can be done. One is called yesterday, and the second is called tomorrow. Today is the right day to love, believe, do, and live. So go out today and love somebody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And now for the postlude, Madeline Harts will end the service with Born This Way by Lady Gaga.
Actually, just so that no one is caught off guard, there's been a slight change to the program. Just wanted to make sure that you weren't expecting Lady Gaga. It's going to be Summer Skies. I hope you enjoy.